Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Okay, I'm back. Actually, I've been attempting to film another video for some time, but as you know, my computer has not been cooperating. So I've been coming out here every couple days, every day or two, kind of recording a test video. Not an episode of Tales, actually just turning on the camera and having it record, and then stopping it after running it for some time to see what I get. Sometimes I get the blank file, which is a problem that I talked about earlier. I've been recording Tales from the Garage for up to 40-something minutes, hitting end record, and it wipes out the file. So that's problem number one. New problem I had was it was recording the file, but for every, say, 4 minutes or so of video I was recording, when the file would finish and I would hit end record, I would get between 5 and 6 minutes of video for a 4-minute video. And I'm like, well, what's going on there? And I'd play it back, and sure enough, it's playing back at the wrong speed, at a slow speed, which is exactly what my old computer did before it died. I think, I don't know, I guess it's a processor thing, but my old computer, which is actually still sitting on the shelf right next to me, which was the one that I started filming my videos on, actually even before the garage stuff here. And if you ever went back to the real early videos, you'd see a video that, all of a sudden I'd be speaking away, and it sounds like I was, in The Exorcist, like I was possessed or something, because everything would speed down real slow. So that computer died, but I keep it here because I've got music and things in there, and I'm always discovering albums and music that I've dumped in there that I don't have anywhere else in my collection. Like, if you ever buy music, downloads, which I rarely do, but there's some things that are available only on download, and not really recalling, the thousands of albums I've got on my old computer. I would often obviously forget, well, which are the ones that I don't have in a physical form that I can't put back in the computer? Well, I've got a whole bunch of download albums in a computer that I haven't used for years, for 2-3 years or more. So that's, every once in a while I discover, where's that album? I know I had that album when I'm looking in my main newer computer that's a couple years old, because that's where I listen to all my music from. Then I realize, oh crap, that was a download album and I don't have it in here, which means I've got it in my 10-plus-year-old computer, and I got to turn that thing on, that beast on, and, let it start up for an hour and a half just to extract, something, or even look for something that I hope is in there. And I've found things in there very recently that I can't believe are as old as they are, but sure enough, they're not in any of my other computers. So when this one eventually does die and stops working, the funny thing is everything else seems to work. I don't do anything really on it. I don't really surf the internet or anything like that on here. But all that seems to work. I play music from here, and that seems to work okay. So it's just something about recording these videos, and maybe it's just memory or processor uses, the system a lot more heavily to make the videos, which is why I'm noticing the issues with the, that I'm having recording the videos here. But when it dies, I've got an old cracked screen iPad, a mini iPad. I'm going to use that as long as that works. And if I can stop dropping it and breaking it even further, maybe it'll last a while. I don't know. But already that's giving me some funky signs too. Anyway, something I started doing a while back, which I wish this were smell-o-vision and you could smell the incense that I've got going. I started burning incense, which I've had incense a whole bunch of time, and I've been hesitant to burn them because generally I don't want to be without them, so I like opening the bag, kind of wafting it around and getting the scent in the room. And some of these are very aromatic, very, very strong scent. So you don't actually have to always burn them. But I did, about a month or so ago now, started burning the incense. And I tell you, you forget when you don't do it for a while, you forget how nice that could be, how that really, I don't know, for me, it creates a real calming sense. It really mellows me out, as if I needed to be any more mellow than I am. And I just really dig that. It just kind of creates I noticed on some of the videos I was filming, the ones that didn't actually come out, I noticed how I was speaking much more slowly than normal, simply because of the incense just kind of creating a whole mellow, laid-back mood. I don't know, it's hard to be stressed when you've got this beautiful scent around you. So I'm going to attempt to do another video, and I hope this one comes out. I had lots of things to talk about since my last video, and the problem is I forget what they are now, some of them. Others I think I spoke about, only to remember maybe later that, oh, those are on the videos that didn't come out, so didn't post. So I don't know, and you may hear me repeat myself. Maybe there's something that I thought wasn't in a video that wasn't an earlier video that I might speak about. I don't know. But I'm just going to go back, and I'm just going to do, after this long preamble, I'm just going to do a random selection and talk about it. Here's one that I another one that I thought I chose already, and of course it's an ECM album. And I did speak about this because this is the start of spring and summer. This is quite often, and it was this year, the first album that I put on that recalls that season specifically. Excellent album, Red Lanta by Art Landy and Jan Garbrick. This was a very influential album, apparently. And I spoke to Paul McCandless once, and he said, a lot of people were influenced by that album. Came fairly early in the whole ECM thing. Was recorded in November of 1973. So even though it was recorded in autumn, for me, it's got the summer sounds, the spring sounds, the warm weather sounds. Now, those are seasons I don't actually like, but I like the music associated with the seasons because the images that come to mind when I listen to music that reminds me of any season, whether I like the season or not, they're all nice images. So in the summertime, I'll just picture, especially when listening to something like this, grassy fields, that kind of thing. Big, open, grassy fields with no people. And this is often the first time I get in that mode when the warm weather comes and I'm like, I want to hear some seasonal things that I associate with the season, and not just albums I like, but albums that very closely have some kind of connection to the seasons for me. This is often one of the first ones that I think of and I put on. And this past year, it certainly was when spring came and the warm weather kind of arrived. It really did the trick, and I listened to it quite a lot this year, probably more so than in other years, because it's one of those that I've heard a lot. What can I say about it? Well, all the compositions are actually by Art Landy, so it's really, I think it was conceptually an Art Landy album that he asked Jan Garbrick to come and play on. And the real winner with this particular album is that Jan Garbrick plays probably more flute on here than I've heard him play on any other album. So you've got him playing soprano and bass saxophones. But He's also playing a lot of flute, and specifically the classical, the metal flute, which is something he did quite a bit in 73, 74, around the time of his Solstice band. But he hasn't done, actually, in recent years, I don't know if I've heard him play any flute since the late 1980s. And after this, he switched off and he started playing wood flutes, which are, to me, a completely different sound and everything, which I love very much. But it's almost like a completely different instrument because of the sound that the wood flutes have. So here he is on the traditional classical metal flute. Like I said, probably more than any other album I can think of that he plays on. And those tracks are my favorite. The saxophone's very well done on here. This is just a duet, just piano, acoustic piano, and saxophones and flutes. Maybe the saxophone works so well because it's used a bit more sparingly as well. But this is, in terms of his playing, too, I think one of the best albums, or in terms of my favorite albums of his, even though it's not really a Jan Garbarek album. But the flute playing in particular, this is the go-to for the, if I wanted to give somebody an example of Jan Garbarek's flute playing, this would be the album to hear it. And maybe I associate this album so strongly with spring and summer because, for me, probably the first instrument, I don't know why, that I think of when I think of summertime is the flute, is the traditional classical flute. There's just something about that instrument. Maybe it's the, to me, it represents the sound of the wind blowing through the grass and the grassy fields or something like that. But the summertime, springtime is always acoustic instrument time. Those are the times when I listen to more classical music than most of the other times of the year. And mostly acoustic albums are the things in my mind that are summertime albums. And this is all acoustic with just the piano and flutes and saxes. And it's a great, great album. If you like ECM at all, you probably like this album. And if you don't have it, I'd say get it. Now, naturally I have it on CD. I'm hoping it's in print now. I haven't checked. I'm not sure. Oh my goodness, it's the greatest hits of the Brady Bunch. I don't know how to explain this. Here's another one that I thought I spoke about, and it's not an ECM album. Harold Budd and Brian Eno, The Pearl, with Daniel Lanois lending some assistance. I think Daniel Lanois plays a little bit on here, but I'm not sure. Like, he tends to play on a lot of the ambient music albums like this, things like processed steel guitar and things like that, because he's primarily a guitarist. And I know he does that on the Apollo album by Brian Eno. I'm not sure I'm aware of what his contributions to this album are, and they could be electronic sound processing similar to what Eno does, because Daniel Lanois does a lot of that as well. And they don't get into any real details as to what Daniel Lanois' contribution is, but since he's credited, and I'm doing this from memory because I haven't spun this for a while, I don't recall hearing any guitar or anything like that, which is the primary instrument that would come from him. But it could be there, and I'm just not remembering it, or it's so heavily processed, it sounds like another keyboard. This is only the second of two albums that Harold Budd and Eno did together. The first one being The Plateau of Mirror. And that one, I think I like that one a little bit more than this one. That one, I would say, for whatever reason, is more impressionistic to me. There's some longer pieces on there and shorter pieces. This one is mainly shorter pieces, but it's still an excellent album. And for a lot of people I've seen, reading reviews of this, I've seen people mention that they prefer this one over The Plateau of Mirror. But for me, this one's got mostly just short tracks on there. And a lot of them fade in and fade out, which in general I don't have a problem with, but I get the impression that there was more of them improvising in the studio. And what they did is they'd improvise for however long and find a good chunk of that improvisation and just fade in and fade out from that section and not use the rest of it, which is a valid way of working. But to me, I think the earlier album that they did was more maybe compositionally based, like they actually wrote pieces for the album that kind of have a beginning or an end, or have a lot more of a concrete concept behind them. And these are just a whole bunch of pretty pieces, but they're very short. And like I said, I get the feeling that they were doing a lot of improvisations for however long, 10, 20 minutes, whatever, and okay, what worked in that improvisation? And then taking that chunk out and maybe adding a little processing or something to it. That's the vibe I get with this. And you know what? That's fine with me. I love to hear musicians do that anyway. It's a valid way of working, and I think, especially in this area of electronic music, I think a lot of musicians work that way, more than we're aware of. I don't know if I've done it yet, but I would do it on my own things, where I would, I could see myself improvising and then taking a chunk out here and there. It's always a way that I thought I would work, and yet I'm trying to think. I don't think I've done it yet, actually, in any of my recordings. It's a good album. It's a good companion album to the Plateau of Mirror, which is known as Ambient 2. And like I said, a lot of people really prefer this one. But like I said, it's mostly short tracks. And the Plateau of Mirror has a combination of longer and shorter things. Let's see. 4 minutes and 39 seconds. 4 minutes and 46 seconds is like the longest piece on here. Well, it's not as short as I was thinking. I was thinking of these 3-minute pieces, and there's not that many of those. But doing this from memory, I think this album is about 42 minutes long or so. Something like that, about 42 minutes. I have this thing about, for some reason, for a lot of albums, I tend to memorize the running time. Like, I can tell you, the Plateau of Mirror is just under 40 minutes. It's 39 minutes and something seconds. Why do I remember that? I don't know. Okay, I'm risking. Boy, I'm a risk taker here. I'm a gambler. I'm gonna choose one more and just hope that this video is gonna come out. Well, what do you know? I actually pulled one out that the corner was sticking out. It's a, and here's a really big surprise. It's an ECM album. And now the funny thing is, it was a while back. I had a bit of, from choosing all these albums, I had a bit of space in the random pile there, so I put more albums in to fill it out a bit more, to have more to select from. And the ones that I put in, I pretty much specifically did not put in ECM albums yet. I'm still pulling them out. Here's Ralph Towner, Old Friends, New Friends. This is an interesting album, recorded in 1979, I want to say. Yeah, July 1979. This is a good album for people that maybe find a lot of Ralph Towner's music a bit too laid back for them, being that, as a guitarist and often pianist, he doesn't play like electric guitar and doesn't do a lot of terribly up-tempo pieces. And I, for some reason, consider this, I always think about this as his brightest album. And that's in terms of the way it's produced. It's very shimmery and shiny, and there's, I think, a lot more detail in the high end than I'm used to hearing in his music. Now, that could just be the way it's engineered or the choice of instruments. And unlike his solo albums or duo albums or trio albums or quartet albums, this has a large band. This is a 5-piece, which is much larger in an ensemble than he typically works in. Now, not all of the other 4 musicians supporting him play on all the tracks, but they do for the majority. I think there's one track I know that's just a duo with Ralph and David Darling on cello, but most of the other tracks feature the full band. You got actually a couple musicians here who passed away. The great Mike DePasqua on drums. I did a whole video on him. The late Kenny Wheeler on trumpet and flugelhorn, and he's largely responsible for that brightness because the trumpet obviously is a very bright instrument, and the flugelhorn as well. And on bass, upright bass, is Eddie Gomez, who's still with us, and David Darling on cello. And Ralph playing his typical 12-string guitar, classical guitar, piano, and he also plays a bit of French horn. I love his French horn playing. Whenever, on the rare occasion, I see an album that he plays French horn in, for some reason, that's always the instrument I'm waiting to hear, because he plays it very sparsely, very sparingly, but just incredibly apropos to the music. His little simple parts that he plays for the French horn, to me, and I'm thinking of when he does this in Oregon. I know he does it on the Winterlight album for Oregon. I'm just waiting to hear those few phrases from the French horn that he throws in there, because they're the absolute perfect phrase at the perfect time, and it really makes the piece work. So I guess maybe that's why this is such a bright album, because of the French horn, you know, being a wind instrument, and the trumpet flugelhorn being a very bright instrument. And you've got a drummer, you know, actually playing a kit drum in Mike DePasqua. And there's a couple tracks on here. There's the typical kind of mellow, laid-back Ralph Towner things like you would expect. But there's also quite a couple up-tempo things that are very, like, exciting. Excitable, and not things that you hear a lot in his music, and possibly you need a drummer to really bring that across instead of just a percussionist, maybe. You know, the drum kit being a fairly heavy, weighty thing, you know, with the cymbals and everything, really brings those up-tempo pieces across. And Mike DePasqua was a master as far as I'm concerned anyway. This is a good album for people that I think it's slightly more accessible. Not that it was the intent behind it. It's got 6 pieces on there. All of them are by Ralph Towner. So there's no really long pieces by Ralph Towner standards. 8 minutes is the longest piece, but he's had pieces that run much longer than that. And they're band-centric, most of them, except for I think it's only the one track that's just cello and Ralph Towner. But there's a band vibe to a lot of this as well. And I think Ralph Towner can sometimes write difficult compositions, which I love, but if you're trying to introduce somebody to his works, it's like, maybe not this album because there's too much difficult stuff on it. This one is an easy one to get into. Because of those up-tempo tracks, they're easier to follow. Maybe it's also because of Kenny Wheeler carrying the main melody on his trumpet a lot of the times. You know, so it's something that's very easy to tune into in terms of an ensemble. Oh, I understand this is a rhythm section. There's the midsection, which is the guitars and the piano and the cello. And then there's a trumpet flugelhorn kind of thing playing over at the top. So it's kind of like a more modern version of a jazz quintet, maybe. But it's an excellent album. It's very easy to get into, very easy kind of easy album of his to appreciate. And one of these days I have to run. I must run out of ECMs. You would think, right? And this is only vinyl back there. I mean, I have more CDs, but I guess the CDs will be for when I have to go inside. You know, it's a weird week with the high temperatures being much higher than they should be here at this time of year. In the 70s, almost 80 today, they said, but I don't think it hit that here. It's quite cool now. Of course, it's evening now, and the sun went down, and it's nice and cool. I actually had my garage door back there open for a while to let the cool air in, and I noticed it warming up now that it's closed, but it's cool. I mean, if this temperature holds out, I can continue to come out here and do these till the cows come home, but I know it's not going to. So, even though for me this is a short video, it's probably longer than you need. And again, I'm not sure whether or not this is going to work. Keep my fingers crossed. And I'm going to have to check it afterwards to make sure it's not an entire video of my voice slowed down at half speed. But if you're watching this, obviously everything came out okay. All right, guys, I'll be back soon, regardless of whether this video works or not. I'll bring the iPad out here and I'll start filming on the iPad. And there's always a way around it. So, hope everybody's doing well, and I'll be back soon. Take care. Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.